You were carved out of the sea, watermarked by your ancestry, caught between the tide and me. What felt like loss was a victory. You were swept ashore like bottles holding prayers. I brought a little bottle with me today. In this bottle, I wrote my father a note. It just says, "I love you, Dad." We're still working on the rest of it. This isn't going to be a happy little princess story about a father who read me to bed at night, and those kinds of things. But it's going to be a real story, and it's going to be a story of love, a love that is ongoing and a forgiveness process that is ongoing. And I'd like to say up front that any time I'm referring to the flaws and crimes and sins of my father, it is really largely to avoid looking at my own, which is very painful, much more difficult. So at some point I might get to that part in another talk, if you'll have me back again, because I can give about 100 talks. All right. You and I, whomever we are, were carved from the lives of our parents. We were watermarked by them in genetic and environmental ways. If you believe in genetic memory, and I do, we are carrying not only the psychological and physical traits of our parents in our DNA, but something of their experiences, something of their pleasures and their pains, their questions, especially their unanswered questions. Dad and I have been trying to ask some questions of our ancestors and ourselves, and from that effort, a world has opened up to us. Family characters have come spilling out of that vast sea in their little bottles, like little ships or prayers, and sometimes they are beer bottles or liquor bottles. I came up with that image just this morning, by the way. It would make Dad laugh, and I like to make him laugh. So let's say my dad rolled out of the sea in a beer bottle and told me this story, and this is from chapter 1. My dad asked me to write a book about his life. He actually said, write the story, the crazy story of my life, and I have done it. I have 50,000 words of a draft. So this is from chapter 1. I'll read a little bit and talk a little bit. Did the timer start? Did someone start the timer? I did. Okay, great. He's got a sand. Show him. Hold it up. He's got a sand timer for me. When it gets about, hourglass. So when it gets about halfway through, let me know. Okay. My father killed a woman in the winter of 1970. He was driving his 1964 Chevrolet Impala to midnight bowling in Marietta, Georgia, after his shift at Lockheed Martin. At Marietta Lanes, the oldest bowling alley in the area, he explained to me, you could take your beer in there and drink and bowl. The regular leagues that was bowling, they bowled till about midnight and they left, and then we come in, and we was doing pot bowling. We had a little league too, but pot bowling was for money. Whoever got the highest score got the pot. I didn't do good on that. I couldn't keep up. Guys could throw a strike anytime they wanted to. They was great. I lost some money, I won't lie to you. He had his own black bowling bag and ball, and I have a photo of him grinning with a bowling trophy. His life at that time was working and drinking, driving fast cars, having a good time. He shouldn't have gone out on that heavy snow and fog, but he was determined to. A testimonial to the willful nature of my dad and to the stubbornness that might also exist in me. But on that terrible night, the headlights that blinded him started a chain of events that changed our lives for good and took us away from each other for years. He had stopped at a bar for a few drinks and then headed down All Good Road to join his buddies at Marietta Lanes. And soon he noticed a vehicle coming toward him, or seeming to, but it turned out to be standing still, idling. The driver of that car had stopped and opened his door to a woman walking down the middle of the street in the cold. She stood by the door in that moment of deciding, should I get in or should I not? But Dad never saw her. Believing the other car had some kind of car trouble, he swung his car forward and plowed right into the open door, striking the woman. She came flying up to the hood, he says, as he remembers, and then she fell to the ground. I pulled the car over for just a minute, and I should have done something. I should have tried to help her, but I didn't. I kept driving in the direction of the bowling alley. After a few minutes, he realized he needed to turn himself in. So he stopped at an all-night Crystal restaurant where he spotted an off-duty police officer and told him what happened. They got in the police car together and headed back to the scene of the accident, where now emergency crews were all gathered around, and a state trooper waited with the woman's body covered by a sheet. The other driver identified Dad as the man who had struck the poor woman, and Dad was taken to the Marietta jail and booked. He was allowed to call my mother, and soon she arrived at the jail with me in tow. I was 5 years old. I don't remember it. I remember very little of my childhood, especially my early childhood. So I have to rely on what I've been told, on photographs and family stories, and on the occasional firing of my memory cells. I had some kind of strange fainting spells when I was a toddler, and I was put on phenobarbital. The doctor said I had petit mal epilepsy. I had fainting spells, and I was put on phenobarbital, and I stayed on phenobarbital every day until I was 11 years old. It probably didn't help my memory any, but it calmed my anxieties. I am an anxious person. Anybody in here ever have any anxiety? Okay. Yeah. My father is an incredibly anxious person, and that night in Fair Oaks, Georgia, he must have been beside himself. Mom got him a lawyer, an older one with a lot of experience, and bailed him out. He was only in for one night. When time came for court, no one arrived on behalf of the poor woman. She was only about 23. She was in trouble. She had skipped out on bail herself from Texas and had made her way down to Georgia. She may have been suicidal. We don't exactly know what was going on, why she was walking down the street in the middle of heavy snow in the dark and the cold, wrapping her coat around her. She had long black hair. I don't know her name. Dad doesn't know it. I've tried to find it out, and I haven't been able to yet. Mama would tell me years later that the woman had a bad reputation. With no one there to defend her, the judge decided to take Dad's license away for 6 months and fine him. He was back at work the next day. For a while, Mom drove him there, but eventually he started driving himself despite his restrictions. He says, I was a little shaky at first. When I asked how Mama felt about what happened, he said, I think she wanted to leave me then. She kept saying, you're crazy. You're crazy. He didn't really talk to anybody about what happened other than his friend Castleberry at Lockheed. They rolled the big planes in, he explains, and we got started. He learned how to paint planes in the Air Force when he failed flight mechanic school and begged not to be discharged. They sent him to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., and his lifetime career as a painter began with fighter jets, F-106 and 107, military transport planes. The C-130, called Hercules, is described by Lockheed as one of the most important aircraft in aviation history, and my father was painting those planes. The first model of the C-130A was actually flown in Marietta in 1955, but that was long before Dad arrived there. In one of the photos I have of Dad, he's spray painting a gold nose cone, the very front of the airplane, and Mama is helping him. I have some photographs of them together at Lockheed. He met Mama at a party in D.C. She had moved there to work for the FBI when she was 18 years old. Now, you have to know, I'm going to talk to you about my mother. My mother's a whole different day. We'll talk about her another day because my heart. But my mother was incredibly shy. Very, very vulnerable and shy. So it took incredible courage for her to leave her home in New Market, Alabama. This girl who was so shy, that she cried every single day of first grade. She didn't want to leave her mother. She went to Washington, D.C. and worked for the FBI. She was a fingerprint tech, and that's going to be very interesting for us later in this conversation. She was 18. She stayed with her brother Dexter and his wife until she found an apartment there and a roommate named Joyce Bailey. And Mama did well at the FBI. She was promoted within a year. I have a copy of a letter from J. Edgar Hoover congratulating my mother on her promotion. But one of my cats got trapped in the closet and kind of tore it up, so there's not much left of that letter. It was ripped apart like so much else in our lives. Mama probably would have had an excellent career at the FBI, but then she met Dad. He was dancing with Joyce, her roommate, at a party when he noticed Mama, and he soon made his way over to introduce himself, and it wasn't long after that they were engaged. My father was absolutely beautiful. My mother was too. My dad, jet black hair, blue eyes that would just kill you, charm, lean body. He was a really good dancer, and he loved to dance. He was passionate. He was just out of the Air Force, and he needed employment, so he accepted a position at Lear Siegler in Burlington, Vermont, painting aircraft. The president, William Lear, had a remarkable story of his own that I've enjoyed reading. It's called "They Said It Couldn't Be Done." At that time, the country was ready for great adventures into space, the launch of Sputnik to begin with, and for political change with John Kennedy. We would go to the moon, even though some said it couldn't be done. Dad's plan was that Mama would follow him to Vermont if the job worked out. He got settled into the YMCA near the company on a Friday night and was supposed to start work on Monday. Another man staying at the Y told him about a party, and they decided to go. It was way out in the country, and it took them a while to find the place. But they ended up having a good time, drinking, and stayed too long. And back on the road in the man's 52 Chevy, you know what happened. They faced sleet and dark on unfamiliar roads, and Dad remembers thinking, we're going a little too fast, when suddenly they rounded a curve, started to slide, and crashed into a large tree head on. The driver wasn't moving. He was dead. Dad had to get help. He walked for about half a mile to a house, and the next thing he knew, he was waking up in the hospital. He had ugly stitches across his head, and he called Mama to say, I don't think you're going to want to marry me now. I look like Frankenstein. She said it didn't matter. He was in the hospital for 3 days and was going to start work late at Lear, but the manager saw he was in no condition for the job. So he returned to D.C. and stayed with Mama and Joyce for a few weeks. Before he left, though, he went back to the scene of the accident and saw that across from the tree they hit, there was a cliff, and it was a long, long way down. He was lucky it had happened the way it did. When he asked at the hospital, no one would give him any more information, and he left town without knowing exactly what had happened to his friend, but we found out that he died. Mom and Dad got married on May 16, 1964, in a ceremony attended by the Justice of the Peace. I have sweet photos of them from that day. In one, they are embracing, and Mom's lovely long red hair shining from behind. Dad's got his buzz cut, as he always did. He still does, and his prominent widow's peak and his fair skin, and they were both so beautiful. There were no obvious signs in this photo from the damage he'd had in his car accident. After the ceremony, they did some sightseeing around D.C., happily hitting all the tourist spots, until finally at the top of the Washington Monument, they had a quarrel. Dad said he wanted to throw Mom off the top, but they survived that encounter without death by making up as newlyweds usually do. And shortly after the marriage, Mama wanted to go home to Alabama, and soon she was pregnant with me. We lived in an apartment on Byrne Avenue in what is now the Five Points Historic District of Huntsville, Alabama, which, by the way, the latest news says Huntsville is the best city in the United States right now to live in. Most progressive place, lots of promising things happening there, and my daughter lives there. I'm so glad. And tornadoes. Never mind the tornadoes. Dad got a job at Brown Engineering in Huntsville, perhaps best known for its space projects. The 1965 company report says, Brown is engaged in such studies as the selection of landing sites on the moon, the analysis of proposed experiments man may perform when he reaches the moon, and the extended exploration of the moon. Did I mention my mother's last name is Moon? Sylvia May Moon. I love being a moon. Something very magical about it. When I was 3, my mother sat me in front of the television and made sure that I saw the men landing. She said, "You don't want to miss this." And I do remember that part because she made such a big deal out of it, and I sat there and watched it on our little black and white TV. Yes, yes. So let me tell you in Dad's words, because I love giving his words, what his job was like at Brown Engineering. Parts first had to go to the shop where they had to dip them and clean them. Then they brought them over to us and we had to paint them. After they dried, we wrapped them back out and sent them out. At Brown, went to work at 4 p.m. to midnight. I worked by myself at night. I had the shop to myself. The rest of the crew worked daytime. The supervisor sort of liked me because I did a good job, so he let me turn things out at night. I think his name was Donnie. I went to bars after work. He often rode his bicycle to work and back. It was a short distance. So on the day I was born, Dad and Mom had been arguing, and he went to work in that mindset. Mama drove herself to the Huntsville hospital, and it was only after delivery that Dad was summoned. In one photograph I have, Mom is holding me, and Dad is looking down at his newborn daughter with his hands in his painter's pants pockets. They called me Tamara Lynn, but they called me Tammy. "I didn't really love you when you were born," he told me later. Mama loved me deeply, though, and put me in my crib decorated with baby lambs every night, and she read to me all the time and sang, "Tammy's in love." Y'all remember that? From the 60s? Yes. Sing it with me. Tammy, Tammy's in love. Right? I hear the hoot owl. Oh, my mother was so sweet. Yes. Yes. In a photograph of me, and this is getting to you, by the way, because we have a wall of innocence over here. And we want a photograph of you when you were tender and innocent. We want you to put it on that place over there. There's a picture of me over there with Santa Claus. In a photograph of me outside the apartment at age 2 or 3, I'm wearing a little blue and white flowered dress, smiling for all the world as if I knew no sorrow. I had a little red rocking chair of my own, and I always had a little glass bottle of Coca-Cola. There's another photo of me sitting in front of our black and white television watching the moon landing. Unfortunately, Dad was making life at home uncomfortable sometimes. He wanted meat and potatoes every night, and he got mad if Mama was resting or taking a nap when he arrived home. Y'all, I'm sorry, so close your ears if you don't want to hear this next part. When he was drunk, he was mean. Mama told me that once he told her, referring to me, "Get the little bitch away from the television." Still, there were good times. We went to Kansas City where Dad grew up and visited the zoo. There's a photo of me wearing a hat and looking with wonder at a baby deer. Granny Moon, Mama's mother, went with us, and I smiled to see her admiring the giant tortoises in one photograph. I'm pretty sure she'd never traveled anywhere before. She had 13 children in a Jim Walter mobile home in Newmarket, Alabama, and wore homemade dresses all her life. She was only about 45, but Dad said she looked a lot older. Mama liked to go out to Granny and Papa's every weekend, and Dad wasn't crazy about that, but I think it was because he couldn't drink out there. They wouldn't tolerate that, and there were so many people coming in and out, and he found this big family overwhelming. My father was an only child. Let's stop for a second and take a breath. What's your first question on your sheet? If your father rolled out of the sea in his bottle, what would that bottle look like? What would his message in the bottle be for you? What might be his prayer in the bottle? I'll let you think about it for a minute and write something down. If you want to share it, you can. I'm just going to say that on one of our trips to Kansas City, when I was an infant, Dad's adoptive father, Clinton, dropped me after he had too much to drink. Y'all, there's so many stories. Yes, it does. It does. My dad's a weirdo, and so am I. Mama was furious, and we left the next morning, so I'm glad we had a better visit the second time around. Another time we went to Florida where Dad got badly sunburned and had to stay in the hotel room for the rest of the trip, but not before we took a picture together on the sand. He is holding me on his hip, looking gorgeous as always, and both of us seemed happy. He had a beach towel with a sexy woman and 36, 24, 36 on it. Mama was a wisp of a thing, beautiful in her green bikini. 2 photos of her linger in my mind, standing with me by the car, and one of her sitting alone in a lawn chair out in the water at low tide. I'd love to know her thoughts, but it's too late to ask her. I'll ask her in heaven when I see her. I've told you a little bit about the beginnings of the crazy story of me and my father, but the most important thing I wanted to tell you is I didn't see my father from when I was 7 until I was 25. After what happened in 1970, the marriage unraveled, and my dad we left my dad. My dad came home one day, and my mother had emptied out the apartment, and I remember he was standing in his white painter's pants with the paint all over it, because he was a house painter by then. And Mom said, you can go and give him a hug. And I remember running back to my dad's arms, and he held me for a minute, and that was it. And I only saw him one other time, and he tried to kidnap me in the car. So he didn't get to see me anymore after that. So when I was 25, I went and found my father. And I'm 56 now. So for the last more than 25 years, we've been trying to work on our relationship. It isn't entirely successful. We love each other, but there's this tension between us when we're in the room or when we're in a car driving to Atlanta, for example, as we were this weekend. I am probably my worst. The worst in me, I think, comes out when I'm with my father. I can be very cruel. I can be vicious, angry. My old rage comes up, and I just want to spit the meanest things. I turn into somebody I don't want to be. So lately, I've been trying to just get quiet. Let it settle down a little bit before I attack my father again, because he's old and he's pitiful. He's 80 years old. It's time for us to move on. And even though he continues to do things that drive me out of my mind, part of the problem is in me. It's in me. And so I'm encouraging you and me to look at our questions. Your second question is, what's your watermark? What's the thing on your hands that you carried with you from your parents? What patterns? Some of my patterns are my father's patterns. That hot temper that I can get. The mean streak that I can get. I hate it. But there's some good stuff too. So what are the patterns we got from our parents? The shades of lightness and dark. You know, I've got something new in my hand happening. It's called Dupuytren's contracture. Anybody ever heard of it? It's like a knot in your hand. It unfortunately, eventually, it can make your fingers curl down like this. So I'm going to have to go to the doctor. But it's third and fourth finger. There's a little knot starts in your hand and it spreads out to the fingers. This just came up, and I found out that one of the associations with this is your ancestry. Isn't that cool? God's so funny. If you have a Northern European ancestry, you're more likely to get this thing in your hand that I've got. But it's a watermark, so I'm asking us to look at our watermarks. What made us? And then what's the last question on your sheet?
At the end of one of my favorite movies, Smoke Signals, the character asks, if we forgive our fathers, what's left? And I take that to mean forgiving our fathers is the key to peace. What are your thoughts?
If we forgive our fathers, what is left? What does that mean? And our mothers. But today is Father's Day, so I'm focusing on my father. honor thy father and thy mother. And if we forgive our fathers, it seems to me there's not a lot left for us to try to forgive. It seems like this is because it's not just our father, literally, it's our fathers, our ancestors, everything that came down to us that made us into who we are and maybe caused some of our suffering or contributed to it. So I think it's just asking us if we can choose to forgive our fathers, some really miraculous things might happen. And I am trying to do that. And yesterday on the way home from Atlanta, even though a lot of times I'm stiff with my father, we had been singing old country songs, swerving like I'm George Jones. He thinks that's very funny. And I thought I could touch his hand. I could hold his hand. I could do that. I can do that. And I did. Just put my hand on his. He was shocked. And I held his little frail hand for the whole time the song was playing, and it felt so good. It felt so right. And I want to do it more often. And then just some lines from Angel from Montgomery. Does everybody know that? So you can sing it with me? You can sing it with me. Let's go. I am an old woman named after my mother. My old man is another child that's grown old. If dreams were thunder, lightning was desire, this old house would have burned down a long time ago. Thank you.